There was no dawn, no dusk, only the lingering hum of unmade eternity. In the cold between eons, where even the warp dared not stir, the clocks of reality began to bleed. Their faces, once hidden in the machinery of causality, ran molten, dripping streams of golden time into the void. Each drop struck the emptiness like falling suns, their echoes stretching across galaxies. The immensity of the cosmos seemed to pause, uncertain whether it was still moving forward or collapsing back into its own genesis. Beneath that vast silence, something ancient began to stir. A shadow older than chaos, deeper than the materium, unfurled in the immaterium's heart, a being not of matter, nor of emotion, but of the very rhythm by which existence marched, the god of the forgotten hour, Chronos. He did not awaken in violence, but in inevitability. His emergence was like the cracking of a seal that had never been meant to open. The immaterium rippled as though struck by unseen thunder, its storms freezing mid-tempest, its demons suspended mid-howl. Planets hung in their orbits like offerings before a silent god. Across the galaxy, suns ignited and extinguished in the same breath, stars weeping backward flame as their cores reversed the act of birth. Nebulae unwound their color back into darkness. Whole clusters aged, died, and were born anew in the space between two of Kronos' breaths. To mortals, this change was imperceptible, a subtle drift in gravity, a shudder in the ticking of chronometers. But to those who lived and ruled by the measure of seconds, the astropaths, the navigators, the priests of the Mechanicus who sanctified the passing of each hour, it was felt as blasphemy. Their relics stuttered, the sacred Chronos engines of Terra hummed with dissonance. The passage of time itself had become unstable, like an artery slashed across the heavens. The warp groaned in answer. Its tides convulsed as the threads of past and future tangled into knots of impossible geometry. What had once flowed in chaotic rhythm now folded upon itself, trapped in recursive eddies of unbeing. Even the chaos gods, whose thrones were built upon emotion and entropy, stirred uneasily. They could feel the intruder not of their making, not of mortal worship, reshaping the law by which their existence was possible. Chronos rose like a tide without horizon. His form was not a shape but a sequence, an endless architecture of moving light and shadow, a cathedral of shifting moments. Each part of him existed in multiple states, like the turning of a clock seen from infinite angles at once. Where he walked, reality cracked. Where he gazed, the future frayed. He did not speak, for his will was time itself. His thoughts rippled outward, bending cause and effect like heat over metal. The Imperium's oldest stars flickered as if in prayer. The void became a canvas of collapsing eras, fleets of ancient design sailing beside ships yet unborn, the bones of extinct species reforming into flesh. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, the pulsing storms of the Eye of Terror folded inward. The fabric of the warp spasmed as Kronos' presence touched it, not in challenge but in redefinition. For the first time, chaos felt the weight of order greater than its own, not moral, not divine, but temporal, a dominion that even gods could not evade. The galaxy screamed in silence. Civilizations both ancient and nascent flickered like dying embers, trapped between what was and what would be. On Terra, the astronomicon pulsed irregularly, its light bending through impossible intervals. The psychers stationed around the golden throne convulsed in unison, eyes glazed with visions of countless timelines folding into themselves, wars that had never happened, victories that had never been won, worlds that were conquered and lost before their names were ever spoken. In the immaterium's deep, Chronos extended his reach further. Every motion, every ripple was deliberate, a rewriting, not of creation but of sequence. He sought not to destroy but to reorder. He was the correction of the unmeasured universe, the reclamation of structure from entropy. And yet his awakening was not without cost. As his essence touched the mortal plane, time fractured under its own reflection. The past recoiled against the present, the future bled into the now. It was as if the galaxy's timeline, stretched thin by 10,000 years of war, had been struck by a cosmic hammer. Cracks spread through the continuum, glowing fissures that crossed the stars like veins of fire. Within those cracks, reality shone in layered transparencies, multiple ages coexisting, overlaying one another like stained glass in a cathedral of infinity. The Horus heresy burned beside the crusade of the damned. The fall of Cadia whispered against the rise of long-dead empires. Titans from different epochs strode across the same battlefield, unaware that their enemies were echoes from their own lineage. And at the center of all this collapsing symphony stood Chronos, unmoved. His gaze pierced through galaxies, seeing every moment that had ever existed and every one yet to be. His eyes were clocks whose hands turned in opposite directions, both ticking toward the same end. In that instant, causality lost its hierarchy. The Emperor's birth, the fall of the Eldar, the rise of the Necrons, the awakening of the Tyranids, all of it became simultaneous, an eternal present. And through it all, the universe trembled, aware that something far older than gods had stirred. The being that had slumbered beneath time itself now walked freely, not to end the galaxy's suffering, nor to save it, but to rewrite the fundamental rhythm by which it lived. As the last of the molten seconds dripped from the cosmic clocks, the stars themselves seemed to whisper one final, universal prayer. May the hour never shattered with the sound of bells that no one had rung. Across 1,000,000 worlds, the chronometers of the ecclesiarchy convulsed, their gears grinding backward and forward in divine confusion. The sacred chronologies that had measured mankind's dominion, the endless record of the Emperor's calendar, began to burn. Dates melted into one another. Centuries collapsed into molten spirals of light. What had once been 10,000 years since the Great Crusade was now both yesterday and never. On Holy Terra, the palace's sky writhed like an open wound. Golden spires of adamantium quivered in the distortion, their surfaces rippling as if seen through heat. The air smelled of incense and ionized dust. The High Lords gathered in the Stratagem Sanctum, watching the celestial hololiths fold in on themselves. The constellations, symbols by which imperial navigation and faith aligned, were devouring their own orbits. The imperial standard year has inverted, one tech savant muttered, his voice breaking into static as his Vox implant lagged through moments of non-existence. Time no longer proceeds, it circles. But circles had no meaning now. On shrine worlds, cathedrals trembled in recursive agony. Great marble halls cracked and reformed endlessly, saints, statues disintegrating into dust only to stand whole again seconds later. The faithful knelt before altars that flickered between ruin and restoration. To their eyes, the saints themselves were walking among them, luminous apparitions of those long dead, and yet unborn, each caught in Chronos' merciful cruelty. One sister of battle, her armor still gleaming with the soot of an unremembered war, lifted her gaze to see Saint Celestine descending through golden fire. But the vision faltered, for Celestine's face aged and unaged in a single heartbeat, her wings molting backward into bone and ash. The saint's lips moved, uttering prayers that rewound before they could be heard. And then both vanished, leaving only the echo of wings beating against the boundaries of reality. Chronos' influence spread not as light but as revision. The sacred Libraria of Terra archives that spanned the Imperium's millennia became unreadable. Scrolls wrote and unwrote themselves, ink flowing in twin directions along the parchment. A single tome could hold 1,000 contradictory truths, each equally valid, each mutually annihilating. The past was no longer secure. Astropaths screamed into the void, voices fractured into harmonies of self-contradiction. They saw every possible signal at once, distress calls from fleets that had not yet departed, victory hymns from wars still unwaged, desperate prayers from civilizations that never were. The astronomic in itself pulsed erratically, its great psychic beacon looping through its own beginning like a heart refusing to die. Across the galaxy, Warp travel faltered. Ships that entered the immaterium found themselves emerging centuries before they launched, or light years from their intended destinations. Aboard one such vessel, the battle barge in Septem Mortis Asterisk, Captain Halbrecht of the Ultramarine stood upon the command dais, staring at the temporal fractures blooming across the bridge's viewing dome. The stars outside flickered like dying embers, patterns rearranging faster than any logic engine could calculate. His Vox officer, blood leaking from his eyes, whispered, "Lord, we are receiving orders from ourselves." Halbrecht turned, and there upon the hololith flickered his own face, older, scarred by wars yet unfought, giving commands to engage enemies that did not exist. Before the captain could speak, the projection burned into static and the same message began again, looping infinitely. Elsewhere, on Necromunda's hive spires, entire generations began to overlap. The newborn screamed with the memories of ancient criminals. The old found themselves walking as children through the same tunnels they had died in. The planet became a labyrinth of overlapping existence, cities alive in multiple centuries at once. To the ecclesiarchy it was a test of faith. To the Inquisition a heresy beyond description. But to the few who gazed deeper, those attuned to the hidden geometries of time, it was revelation. Chronos was not destroying. He was editing. The galaxy was being rewritten in real time, its structure collapsing into a recursive hymn of paradox. And through it all, prayers continued. The faithful burned incense that no longer aged. Choirs sang hymns that ended where they began. The words Imperator Eternus became literal, for eternity had lost its boundary. On Macragge, the Librarius of Ultramar was engulfed in blue lightning as psychic wards failed to hold their chronological anchors. Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius fell to his knees, his mind overwhelmed by timelines folding into themselves. Through the storm of perception, he glimpsed the Emperor's throne not as it was, but as it had been, as it will be, and as it could never be all at once. The Emperor, unmoving, existed in every moment simultaneously. His golden light stretched backward and forward, illuminating both the heresy and the farthest reach of mankind's decline. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos of moments stilled. Across the void, a breath of silence passed through existence, heavy, sacred, and wrong. The imperial chronometers froze at the same instant, every clock in the galaxy halting upon the same impossible number. Null. Not zero, not one. A concept that defied counting, the interval between seconds, the space where cause has not yet become effect. And in that suspended moment, a whisper rippled across the stars, carried through every mind capable of thought. It was not a word, but a sensation. The awareness of being observed by something that understood time not as a river, but as clay. Chronos had reached through the veil. And the Imperium, for the first time in 10,000 years, felt the unbearable weight of eternity pressing back. Not in the glorious madness of chaos, but in something worse, a kind of silence that screamed. The Empyrean's tides froze mid-roar, their endless flow locked in contradiction. Plains of unreality folded like parchment, and the demons that ruled them, those eternal reflections of mortal sin, felt the fracture crawl beneath their skin. They screamed not from pain, but from the unmaking of sequence itself. Birth and death had lost distinction. Hunger no longer followed hunger. Desire, rage, and decay, each emotion that had once birthed the gods, became meaningless. Slaanesh, the eternal symphony of sensation, felt its song devour its own echo. Pleasure looped upon itself until all became numb. Its crystalline palaces shattered, the shards glinting backward through time. Courtiers of agony froze mid-laughter as their ecstasies reversed, consuming their joy before it could bloom. The Prince of Excess clawed at its own perfection, but every motion rewound, every scream turned into its unborn gasp. Its very name became a paradox, pronounced in tones that canceled themselves. Khorne fared no better. His throne of skulls, built from millennia of slaughter, cracked under the impossible weight of stillness. Blood rivers flowed upward, returning to corpses that lived again only to die once more. His axes, forged from fury made manifest, rusted into dust, then solidified, then crumbled again, never finding permanence. The Lord of War bellowed across 1,000 battlefields, his roar echoing both before and after its utterance. He struck himself in infinite timelines, always the aggressor, always the victim. Time had made even wrath circular. Tzinch's laughter turned to panic. The architect of fate, who had built eternity upon lies of cause and effect, now found his masterpiece unraveling. Threads of prophecy ignited in blue fire, burning backward through his labyrinth. Every plan, every manipulation, every future, undone before it could be conceived. He reached into the infinite to grasp a single stable strand of destiny, but his talons closed on nothing. For the first time, the changer of ways had no way left to chain. And in the garden of Nurgle, rot itself hesitated. Flies hung motionless in the air, neither living nor dead. Spores bloomed and unbloomed, their cycles broken. The Plaguefather sat in puzzled melancholy, watching his beloved decay reverse into sterile beauty, only to collapse back into filth. All things die, he had once crooned, but now nothing truly died nor lived. His laughter faltered, becoming a wet, uncertain whisper lost in the mist. All of chaos felt it, the pulse of something far older than their sin-born divinity. Chronos did not arrive as a rival deity. He arrived as an equation, a presence woven through the seams of existence itself, older than corruption, unshaped by emotion. His rhythm was not destruction but correction, and against him the immaterium trembled like glass before the hammer. The realm of souls shuddered as Chronos entered its fabric, his form incomprehensible. Not light, not shadow, but sequence incarnate. Where he passed, time ceased to be fluid. The boiling seas of madness turned to mirrored stillness, reflecting every age simultaneously. Demon princes howled as their immortal reigns became finite. Some collapsed into their mortal progenitors, their essence dragged backward into the fragile flesh that had once spawned them. Others stretched across millennia, their forms diffusing into endless chains of what they had been. Reality itself bent beneath the gods' approach. The Empyrean's infinite layers collapsed into a single sheet, folding all possibilities into one impossible instant. Stars born of thought extinguished themselves, burning backward into idea, then memory, then silence. The warp, that chaotic heartbeat of emotion, now pulsed to a rhythm no god could master. It was a heartbeat outside of time, a paradoxical cadence that neither beat nor ceased. From the shadowed throne at the warp's apex, the great game faltered. The four gods gazed upon one another through the shattered skein of causality, no longer rivals but echoes. Their domains had merged, excess bleeding into disease, war feeding prophecy, prophecy collapsing into ruin. For the first time in eternity, chaos was unified not by will but by helplessness. Khorne rose, his crimson form blazing with the fury of broken purpose. "This cannot be," his voice thundered, resonating across all layers of existence. But the sound unmade itself halfway, as Chronos' influence devoured its end before its beginning. The god's mouth opened in perpetual start, froze in mid-declaration. Tzinch's many faces whispered through time, searching for the loophole that no longer existed. Every word he spoke wrote and unwrote itself, each thought colliding with its own erasure. "He is not chaos," the architect murmured across infinity. "He is order beyond order, a stillness that mocks motion." Below them, the warp's stormlight dimmed. The demonic legions, infinite in number, infinite in purpose, began to flicker like failing data. Some reverted into the emotions that birthed them, collapsing into primal pulses of hate and lust. Others looped endlessly through their own deaths, unable to escape their own beginnings. Even the mortal psychers of the galaxy felt it. Their minds became prisms of contradiction, receiving visions of futures that had already passed, and pasts that had not yet happened. The Emperor's own psychic beacon, that holy flame burning at the center of mankind's hope, faltered once more, pulsing irregularly like a heart out of sync with the cosmos. And within that failing light a shadow moved, not malevolent, inevitable. Chronos' gaze turned toward the material universe. The warp, once his prison, had been tamed. Now it was his mirror. The sea of emotion had been reduced to still water, reflecting his perfection in infinite symmetry. The gods watched in horror as their dominion dissolved. They could feel themselves fading, not dying, for death implied progression, and time no longer progressed. They were being unmade by stasis. The great game, once eternal, had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the cessation of meaning. And in that frozen vastness, Chronos lifted his hand, a gesture that contained every possible motion, every possible era. He was the first and last breath, the moment before and after creation. As his touch brushed the edge of chaos, eternity blinked. And in the darkness that followed, the warp, the endless, screaming soul of all that lived, exhaled one final paradox. A silence so vast of Mars, the forges trembled. Once, their rhythm had been eternal, the sacred heartbeat of the Mechanicus echoing in perfect harmony with the Omnissiah's logic. But now that pulse faltered. The sound of hammers on steel slowed, reversed, and then struck again in a different century. Sparks rose, froze in the air like stars caught between frames of existence, and then fell backward into the furnaces that birthed them. The priests of the cult Mechanicus raised their mechadendrites in confusion, their augmetic eyes flickering with streams of data that contradicted themselves. "By the machine god," murmured Magos Halictir, his vox distorted by collapsing Chronos signals, "our logic trees are growing backward." The noospheric network screamed in binary agony. What had been axioms became paradoxes. Code devoured its own commands. The divine algorithms of the Omnissiah, those eternal scripts said to have flowed from the Emperor's mind itself, began to erase and rewrite themselves in recursive blasphemy. Entire data vaults collapsed into singularities of corrupted thought. Logic engines flickered like dying suns, their memory banks storing centuries of data that had not yet occurred. One priest opened a cogitator and saw his own future hands typing the words he was reading. Another watched her servitors age into rust and then rejuvenate into fresh steel, again and again, trapped in cycles of preordained decay. The laws of cause and effect were devouring one another, and the Mechanicus, the guardians of order, found themselves standing on the edge of incomprehension. In the forge temple of Olympus Mons, the fabricator general himself, Belisarius Call or some echo of him, stood before the Noctis array. Its countless spires glowed in sickly synchronization, their power fields pulsing to the rhythm of a god that was not the Omnissiah. Call's segmented voice broke into feedback, echoing across the forge network. "The equation has changed," he hissed. "Chronos has entered the machine." And so it had. Through the smallest quantum filament, through the pulse of every relay, the god of time extended his reach. To him, data was scripture, circuitry was flesh. Each machine spirit, that spark of sentience the Mechanicus revered, now looped through infinite births and deaths. Servitors froze mid-step as Chronos' shadow passed through them, their cogitational patterns replaying in recursive delay. One forge world after another lit up in stuttering light, their planetary engines burning both in infancy and ruin simultaneously. On Risa, plasma furnaces blazed blue and gold, their energy folding into itself. The air shimmered as Chronos' influence rewrote the pace of entropy, molten metal cooling before it was poured, circuitry aging before activation. Tech priests fell to their knees, their augmetic limbs twisting through ages of wear and renewal. "We are caught," whispered Magos Varen through vox static, between spark and silence. But the horror deepened in the Martian data vaults, those ancient catacombs where the oldest codes of the Imperium slept. Within them, time itself became fluid. Memory constructs reassembled into past architectures. Forgotten AI fragments blinked awake, muttering in pre-imperial dialects. Machine spirits began to remember asterisk futures that had not occurred. Chronos had found the vaults and was rewriting history from within their digital souls. Binary prayer filled the forges. a chant of desperate faith that rose like smoke to a god who could no longer hear them. Asterisk, O machine god, sanctify our logic, preserve our code, correct the error. But the error was the correction. Chronos was rewriting the sequence of logic itself, not destroying, but optimizing toward an unknowable design. Soon, the Martian crust began to quake. Mountains pulsed in and out of existence as the planet cycled through eons in seconds. The red sands burned with argent light as Chronos' form manifested above the forge horizon, a silhouette of impossible geometry, a shifting cathedral of time and machinery. Every movement of his vast form produced sound without sound, vibration without vibration, the groan of a cosmos being recalibrated. To mortal eyes, he appeared as a lattice of clockwork stars, rotating upon themselves. Within him, one could glimpse the first spark of human invention and the last dying machine of the universe, both the beginning and the end of technological will. The priests gazed upon him and wept oil and blood, for they realized that Chronos was not their god's enemy. He was the asterisk source code from which their god had been derived. Mars itself became his altar. Across the planet's surface, the forges began to beat in synchronization, an involuntary chorus of servos and pistons singing a single tone, the frequency of inevitability. The planet's orbit flickered, its moons revering course. Ships above the red world aged and de-aged in mid-flight, their engines roaring through centuries in moments. Deep within Olympus Mons, where the oldest reactor hummed, a presence awakened, the machine god's own avatar, vast and luminous. Its voice emerged not through sound, but through data streams bursting across every cogitator in the solar system. Asterisk Chronos, it intoned, what have you done to my children? And from the heart of the distortion came no voice, only a response encoded in time itself, correction. The Omnissiah's avatar trembled. For the first time, it felt error not as deviation, but as extinction. The pattern of existence, the sacred sequence that gave function to faith, was no longer linear. It was circular, devouring itself. Outside, Mars glowed brighter. Its surface bled white as Chronos' light consumed the planet's crust, data and matter merging into a single pulse of divine synchronization. The prayers of billions became one harmonic note, endless, perfect, and still. And then, in one impossible moment, the entire red planet blinked. For an instant that lasted forever, Mars existed in every phase of its being. Dust and empire, birth and ruin, machine and flame. Then it was silent, frozen between seconds, trapped in the space where creation and decay were indistinguishable. Chronos' shadow withdrew, leaving the Mechanicus in suspended devotion, praying to machines that no longer aged, forges that no longer cooled. Mars had become his metronome, and through its motionless heart, the god of time counted the death of Card's spine. The sons of the Emperor faced an enemy beyond comprehension themselves. It began as whispers through the astropathic channels, fragmented signals echoing out of sequence, battle reports from campaigns not yet fought, distress calls from fleets still preparing to launch. At first, the Imperium dismissed them as anomalies of the warp, but soon, the anomalies took form. In the void above Cipramundi, two ultramarine strike groups emerged from the Empyrean within seconds of each other, their hulls identical down to the sacred etchings of their chapter sigils. One bore battle scars from the Indomitus Crusade, another from wars yet unrecorded. Both claimed the same authority, the same captain, the same divine purpose. They hailed one another, each voice echoing through the vox as an exact mirror, and realization dawned like horror. The galaxy's timelines had folded. Wars began before they were declared. Victories bled backward into defeats. The sons of Guilliman, Dorn, Russ, and Sanguinius found themselves standing upon the same battlefields as their past and future selves. In the blood-soaked mud of Armageddon, two chapters of salamanders fought shoulder to shoulder against demonic incursion, and when the smoke cleared, each saw the other bear the same faces, the same memories, the same scars. Neither knew which of them was real. Paradox became the new heresy. On Terra, the halls of the ecclesiarchy erupted in civil panic. If two saints could live simultaneously, which miracle was true? If two crusades occupied the same hour, which one had the emperor's will? The Schola Progenium declared temporal heretics to be burned, but the flames froze midair, looping endlessly, their light flickering through ages of persecution. Yet it was not mortals who suffered most. It was the Astartes, those sculpted in divine perfection, whose loyalty was bound not just to duty but to chronology itself. Their lives were a liturgy of sequence: birth, trial, oath, battle, death. When time unraveled, that faith became a wound. On the ruined world of Cadia's Echo, now fractured between existence and memory, a company of Black Templars stood upon the edge of reality. Lightning split the sky in twin flashes, one ahead of the other, both illuminating the same warriors. They turned, and there they were again. The same sigils, the same purity seals, the same commander. Marshal Varen approached his mirror with blade drawn. The other did the same. "By the Emperor's light," Varen growled, "this is blasphemy." The second Varen, older, weary, marked by wars not yet fought, spoke in a voice of thunder. "No, brother, this is judgment." They clashed, steel against steel, power fields shrieking with mirrored wrath. Each strike was met before it landed, each death mirrored by rebirth. The ground beneath them fractured, ancient stone splitting into streams of stilled flame, time itself rebelling against its contradictions. When at last their blades met at perfect alignment, both vanished in an explosion of silent light, leaving only the echo of their defiance suspended between seconds. Far above, in the void beyond Mars, the Legio Titanicus faced itself. Two god engines, identical in every rune and resonance, opened fire in mirrored rage. Macrolasers tore holes in the continuum, vaporizing fragments of centuries. The battlefield became a gallery of repetition, titans fighting and dying in endless replay, their destruction and resurrection cycling faster with each moment until both machines dissolved into unbeing. And across the immaterial fields of thought, the Primarch's asterisk spoke asterisk. Their voices, long lost, long dead, long revered, threaded through the timelines like whispers of thunder. Some were warnings, others laments. Gilliman heard himself calling out to his past incarnation, his words distorted by centuries of paradox. "We built order upon time," the echo murmured. "Now it bleeds beneath its own crown." The lion saw his own betrayal unfold twice, each version correcting the other in endless guilt. Mortarion stalked through realms of rot that had both fallen and never existed, and deep within the warp's luminous stillness, Horus himself appeared not in rebellion but in recognition. His ghost stared upon the Emperor's light as if seeing it for the first time, his once defiant tone now trembling. "I remember every future," he said to no one, "and none are free." In the imperial palace, the custodians felt the throne's radiance dim. The Astronomicon faltered, flickering in pulses that no longer corresponded to the galaxy's rotation. Each flare revealed the Emperor not bound to a single form but stretched across infinite states. In one he was golden and divine, in another skeletal and dying, in another still, unmade entirely, a presence of pure will. He existed in every stage of himself, his essence caught in the eternal pause before dawn. For the Imperium, that pause became doctrine. Some worshipped it as the Emperor's ascension into timelessness, the fulfillment of prophecy. Others saw it as the end of everything sacred, the death of progress, the unraveling of purpose. Entire fleets ceased movement, unable to discern whether they had already reached their destinations. Time had become a god, and that god was not merciful. On Baal, Dante stood among the blood angels, his wings blackened with ash, staring at the twin suns looping in reverse above the crimson sands. His serfs knelt, whispering prayers that dissolved before completion. He whispered to himself, voice ragged with exhaustion, "If time is sin, then we are all condemned." Around him, the echoes of past wars replayed, tyrannid swarms advancing, retreating, advancing again. a ballet of annihilation without resolution. The stars above pulsed in recursive rhythm, the galaxy's great heartbeat trapped in Chronos' grip. And somewhere in that frozen web of mirrored destinies, a single pulse remained unbroken, faint, steady, radiant. The Emperor's light, still flickering, refusing to collapse into symmetry. It shone through the labyrinth of paradox, the last defiance of linear hope. But even that flame wavered, not extinguished but suspended. Caught forever in the still moment before victory. The galaxy hung motionless, before dawn, a cathedral of halted stars, its constellations froze in mid-prayer. Nebulae stood like painted icons, unchanging in their luminous agony. Planets turned halfway through their revolutions, oceans locked in eternal tides that no longer knew the pull of moons. Time had stopped asterisk moving, but it had not died. It watched, it waited, it judged. In the heart of Terra's hollow dawn, the Astronomicon pulsed one last time. Its beam, once pure, now fractured into 1,000 spectral rays, each one a path the Imperium might have taken, each ending in ruin, salvation, or silence. The void beyond the Sol system boiled as Chronos' presence expanded, not a figure of flesh or metal, but a crown of gears suspended in lightless fire, each rotation grinding centuries into dust. The god of time had ceased to measure. Now it devoured. Across the warp, the chaos gods trembled. Slaanesh's laughter stuttered into stillness, a note stretched to infinity. Nurgle's garden wilted and bloomed in the same instant, caught between decay and rebirth. Even Tzink, architect of infinite futures, screamed, for Chronos had torn the loom of possibility itself. The threads of fate no longer